Hey there, Anomalies. Welcome to another episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast, where we help teachers discover ways to make side income or replace their entire income online. Today, my guest is Alex Asher.
Likewise, I think that there's massive opportunity for...
We're going to talk about how to create an online teaching platform from scratch, the benefits of being the first person to circumnavigate the North Island of New Zealand, and how to get started teaching online in just a few minutes using tools like his. I'm your host, Ray Blakney, and I can't wait to get started. Enjoy the show. Hey there, Anomalies. Welcome to another episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast. I'm here today with Alex Asher. How you doing, Alex?
Yeah, good, mate. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. So Alex is the CEO of a company online called LearnCube.com, but we'll get to that in a second. As you guys know from my previous podcast, what I like to do in the beginning is get to know the guest, and that's what we're going to start to do with Alex. And Alex has a really fascinating background. All the people I have on the episode send me a little synopsis. And I actually want to find out something about this because he's a fellow martial artist like me. But we'll do that next, because my first question is, you circumnavigated North Island and New Zealand like by swimming and running?
Yeah, so that's kind of a crazy story. I actually broke it up into two parts. My first go at it was running from Cape Reinga in the very top of the North Island of New Zealand and running and actually swimming in most of the harbours all the way down the east coast of the North Island.
How long is that in like kilometers in total? Like, I have no idea.
It's about 2,300 kilometers.
I think that's more than I've done in my entire life combined. I've never walked that much.
Yeah, well, I sort of thought, I kind of need to finish off the loop. So actually, just in 2017, I followed up the west coast from Wellington, which is where I'd finished those 6 years previous, and then went all the way up the west coast. Again, sort of running and swimming the harbors and, having a great old time.
What inspired you to do this? I mean, that's for most of us, mere mortals, that's crazy. So what inspired you to do that?
It was actually quite funny. It was actually, I remember seeing a pair of kayakers that had crossed the Tasman Sea from Sydney to Auckland. And I was like, man, these guys are going to be superheroes when I meet them. And they were just two ordinary dudes that didn't have anything particular that made them super special, but they had the guts to do something crazy. And so that actually gave me a bit of inspiration that maybe a mere mortal like myself could also do something like this. And it appears I was right. So
well, maybe you're a superhero, not a mere mortal, because the rest of us, would collapse on that. So how did you train for something like that? I mean, I think this speaks to your mindset a lot, and we'll get into that later, but how do you train for, it's essentially a super marathon, but
yeah, it's so again, when I first did it, I didn't know anything, so that kind of helps.
I think most of us entrepreneurs are the same, right? It's much better not knowing what you're getting into, because you'd think twice if you did.
Exactly. So I didn't really think too much of it. I was just like, oh yeah. And actually, I didn't even think I would be doing a marathon a day. I just thought that I would just be carrying, just seeing what I could get up, what I could do. And look, it was just starting with 5 kilometers. Could I do 5 kilometers 6 days a week? Yes. Can I do it 6 kilometers 6 days a week? And then just sort of built up the distance that way. But might I say, also, I experienced injuries. I screwed it up a couple of times. I got injured in my second week in quite a bad state in my first trip down the East Coast. And I had another massive injury that stopped me from walking, basically. Well, I had to keep on walking for the first 2 weeks because I hurt myself on the third day of the second.
What did you do on those injuries? I mean, how did they happen? You just running?
The first one's pretty obvious in a way. I didn't really think about it. Again, going back to what you don't know. If you're going down the same direction the entire way, there's a camber. And so one side of your body in your leg is doing more work than the other. And so I actually really pulled all the basically the front of my shin that first time. And then the second time was a similar kind of event, but took only 3 days to get there.
You're improving at least on how quickly you injured yourself.
How quickly I did it. So that was quite exciting. I was like, wow, 3 days. That's all I did. Fantastic. Great. But again, I think part of that was, how do I prepare for that? Didn't prepare, but I kind of knew that, hey, bad stuff's going to happen, and keep going.
I'll ask you a little deeper question now. What drove you to do this? I mean, I know you saw those two kayakers and you said, oh, they didn't seem so special, but there must have been something deeper, if you don't mind me asking. You know, for somebody to do something that incredible, it's usually not totally on a whim. There's something they want to prove. There's something in there. There's something. Do you know what that is? Could you say what that was?
I think it's always going to be a blend. One of the things I absolutely agree with is you have to have something bigger than yourself to be able to do something like this. 100%. So in my case, I was running for a charity that I then became chair of, and I'm still on the board of, called Sustainable Coastlines. And I wanted to do something that I could do, which was to raise money and funds for them, support their cause. But that was a massive accountability and a commitment device in a lot of ways. When it was really hard, I couldn't just quit. When you tell a lot of people, you can't quit. So having something bigger than yourself was absolutely essential for me as well.
That is actually, I totally agree. That's one of the keys that I found. If you want to get commitment, and I've been in a mastermind group for years now, if you tell 5 people who you respect, even in your case, much more with the charity, you can't really back out anymore, right? If you keep it to yourself, it's easy to come up with excuses. But as soon as you tell others, they'll ask, so what's up with that? And it's really embarrassing to say that you didn't do it. So, wow. And you're still involved with that charity right now?
Very much so, yeah. So I think It's been about 8 years since I've been on the board there.
Nice. So let's take the next step. You were doing this, and how did this lead you into entrepreneurship? Or did it? Or was it an entirely different thing? Because you were doing charity work, you were running, but now you're starting a business that you've been doing for a few years now.
That's right. So the first, again, sort of going into, actually, when you think about it, each time, just after doing something crazy like that, running down the East Coast, I started a business those 6 or 7 years ago. And then in 2017, after I finished that run with my co-founder for LearnCube as my support crew for a part of that, I might add, I joined LearnCube fully then. So it's kind of a unique pathway to entrepreneurship.
That's great. So you want to be an entrepreneur, just run 1,000 miles and then start a business, right? That's our takeaway for this episode.
You'll find that starting a business is harder. So enjoy.
So how did that lead into working here at LearnCube and your entrepreneurship? Because it sounds like you were an entrepreneur before too. LearnCube is not your first venture.
That's right.
Let's talk a little bit about that. How did you get into entrepreneurship? What got you into it, and what do you like about it or don't like about it?
Sure. So I got into entrepreneurship because I really did feel that business had a really positive way to impact the world, and I still believe that 100%. I feel incredibly privileged to be working on LearnCube, and so I actually came out of this by meeting my co-founder in an entrepreneurship program called Startup Chile, where I went to Santiago for 6 months. He and I were actually working on different projects at that time. Dan, my co-founder, had actually started LearnCube then, but in a sort of slightly different way. It started as an online school, and that eventually morphed into just providing the technology for online schools, and that morphed into us delivering basically a virtual classroom for language teaching in specific. And then I joined him 3 years after us meeting because we were basically very aligned, different complementary skill sets. And then that basically led me to leaving my own startup and joining LearnCube. And it's been a great story.
That's actually an interesting question. What have you found different? And I'm talking to somebody I guess I've started every startup I've done with a partner, but it's been my wife. So that's kind of a slightly different circumstance, I think. So what did you find different between starting your own startup by yourself and then getting into a startup with a partner? What have been the differences, advantages, disadvantages for you?
It's been immense for me to have Dan as a friend and co-founder. I actually I started a previous business alone, and did that 3.5-year stint alone, and that business didn't succeed. So that's a first kind of like objective fact, is that this LearnCube is a real success story, and I think part of that is because me and my co-founder Dan, we work really, really well together. We complement each other, and when time gets tough, we're able to support each other. So having somebody to go in really, really helps.
Nice. So that's one of the first things you've learned about getting into entrepreneurship. It's better to go with somebody else as long as you complement each other and it doesn't cause conflict. We're going to go into our break right now, and that's going to take us into the second part of our interview, where we're going to talk about not only what Alex has learned, but also stuff he can teach you about teaching online based on his years with LearnCube and the hundreds, if not thousands, of tutors that have gone through their system. We'll be right back.
We interrupt our regularly scheduled programming for this important announcement. Are you suffering from chronic teacheritis? Do you suffer from regular outbreaks of, "This is not why I became a teacher. I can't make ends meet on a teacher's salary," or "Why do I have to use this useless material for my students?" Then a weekly dose of the Anomalous Educator podcast could be the pseudo-magical solution you are looking for. It has unscientifically been proven to help teachers cure teacheritis and learn how to make a side income, or replace their entire income by teaching online using methods they know are best without having to use some government-mandated material. It has also been shown to provide more free time to spend with friends and family. To report your case of teacheritis today, please log on to the website www.anomalouseducator.com or subscribe to this podcast. The Anomalous Educator podcast is most effective if taken with a glass of wine after a hard day at school. Warning! Side effects may include sudden urges to quit your jobs, travel the world, and start improving educational systems and lives of students everywhere. Please consult your physician before starting. We now return to our regularly scheduled programming.
And we're back from the break. We're with Alex Asher, and we're going to talk a little bit about his experiences with LearnCube and hopefully learn something about, what he's done in all that time. So Alex, tell us a little bit about LearnCube. What is it? How can people take advantage of it? And then we'll get into kind of lessons you've learned from the experience.
So with LearnCube, we help generally large education companies and independent language teachers across the world. And we do that with a virtual classroom software that really enables the best live language learning experience. We do that with a smart whiteboard, a content library, and we're really working with how do we provide content in more meaningful ways and make it a more engaging experience. So that's a little bit about what we do. And we sort of tend to work with companies as large as Babbel and as small as the independent teacher that's just trying to make it.
Nice. And what have you learned from kind of what makes a successful online teacher and what doesn't? Do you have kind of access to that kind of data through your dashboard?
Yeah, I think it's been really interesting. We're exposed to a really wide range of different people wanting to achieve different results with their business. I actually think with the independent teacher, teaching online can be phenomenal. It can be a really empowering experience. And if you're a single entrepreneur, actually, in a way, as a tutor, you can go really far because your costs are fairly low. You're not having to manage people, manage other staff. And so in a way, I think the independent tutor has a massively positive and bright future, particularly with tools such as LearnCube to make that happen. Likewise, I think that there's massive opportunity for larger language companies that have a bit of scale. Because they've already got enough teachers to be able to manage those staff and be able to get some efficiencies in the operation. But I do think that there is a challenge for independent teachers without kind of enough customers trying to get in and over-optimize their kind of platform and over-engineer their kind of processes when they don't have customers. And that's something I'm actually quite happy to kind of talk about because I think it's so important that people start where they are and kind of make it work.
Let's do it. And actually, I wanted to dig a little deeper into that because I think most of the listeners of this are going to be individuals looking to start, like teachers who want to get online. So they're not going to be $1 million companies that, want to have 10,000 students. What kind of advice and what are the steps, do you think, to do what you're talking about, right? They're getting up, they overcomplicate the process. What would be your advice if they're starting off?
Keep it, you can keep it really simple. So, I mean, for example, we don't actually try and ask people to use our most sophisticated product when they're starting their business. It's not like, do you need an online school? It's more like, do you need a professional virtual classroom so you can, provide a great experience? Of course you do. But you don't need all the bells and whistles. Generally, if you're working with less than, say, 30 to 40 students, it's pretty easy to deal with either a Calendly or an email, or there's not that many customers that you can't handle initially. And then as you grow, then kind of think about how to kind of take those next steps. But I think we tend to see people worry about the technology rather than the biggest problem, which is, hey, can I get customers?
I will definitely, we'll dig into that, can I get customers in a second, but I'll give a little anecdotal story about when we started, Live Lingual, our business. For the first 5 years, I'm embarrassed to say, because I'm a computer engineer, it was Google Docs. I mean, literally, you would track it in spreadsheets, because when Live Lingual starts, it was me and my wife. So we didn't write a software for it. We went to Google Docs, and you had a little spreadsheet. You'd fill it out when you had a class. And it took us a little longer than necessary in order to kind of build a more sophisticated system. But the reason I'm mentioning that is because you're right. Get in there, get the most basic thing that works and build it up off the ground, because you don't want to be spending 100 hours, 1,000 hours building something that nobody's going to use. So start with the simple. That's a great piece of advice. Let's get into the next one, which is another challenge that a lot of teachers have. And that's, how do I get a friggin' student without, signing up for another service and, having them send it. But of course, then they take their cut, which in my defense, since I run one, they should, because, we have staff and all the rest of it. But you might want to go and do it yourself. How would you do marketing yourself if you're an individual tutor?
I think the first thing is, who are you really trying to serve? So one of the things, like we follow a lean startup kind of approach in our business, and we're trying to make a really big business. Even if you're trying to do a small business and just have a successful tutoring company, start with something small. So that just means, what are the assumptions that I need to cover? And in that case, how do I get my first client? In this case, I would say start with, where are you strong? Do you have a niche? Do you have networks that other people don't? So if you're based in a small community, start with that small community, because probably you know it better than anyone else. And maybe I'll also kind of go into maybe what's not a good idea, which is what I tend to hear. Because I think they kind of back each other up. What is not a good idea is, and we hear it a lot, is I'll ask, what's your marketing strategy to get your initial customers? And it's like, I'm just going to use Google and Facebook. And the big problem with that is, so is everybody else. And they have much bigger budgets, and you can just burn through money that way. So you do need to find some kind of natural, organic way of getting leads, because otherwise they're too expensive and you make no money. And that's why marketplaces, tend to exist as well, because they provide the customers. And if you're a teacher, that's great. You get the customers and you teach. But I can talk a little bit more about maybe how else I'd think about niches, and how you might target those specific niches in terms of getting those initial customers.
I think that'd be invaluable. So what advice would you have? And do you have any, anecdotal success stories, without naming names and even industries, right? Because we don't want everybody kind of rushing into that. What are some things that you know of that have worked for some of your tutors?
So I've seen successful, certainly when you're starting, successful business just emerge out of a niche. Say, one was like, I think she's teaching flight attendees, super niche. But then she can go, once she's got a success with one kind of airline, then it's much easier for her to say, hey, I'm a specialist in this. If you have flight attendees, you should use me. And that makes a lot of sense. I think those sorts of niches are what people should be looking at, rather than, hey, how can I provide general online tutoring in languages or whatever to the broadest market possible. So I think that's how you should think about things.
I think it's Pat Flynn, a famous podcaster online, that says the riches are in the niches. I don't know if he's the one who said it originally or he just quoted somebody else, but that's one of the things that they say out there. The riches are in the niches. The wonder of like online is There's another book out there. I believe it's called 1,000 True Fans. And now 1,000 True Fans sounds like a lot to a lot of people. But in the grand scale of the internet, 1,000 people is nothing. I mean, that is a drop in the bucket. If you can get 1,000 people to pay you $10 a month for something, you have a $120,000 a year business. Yeah. And that's not even a fraction of a percent of the number of people on the internet looking for something. So that's amazing advice for, anybody who's starting off. What are some bad things that you've seen people do other than kind of going too broad? Is there anything else that you've seen that people should avoid when they're starting off?
I think we've sort of covered them. Key things that I would avoid would be trying not to overcomplicate the technology, just keeping that super simple, like a classroom, a way of scheduling, and just using proper email. And obviously working on the website and kind of getting your messaging right. So getting your kind of core basics right. I think the other thing is definitely trying to hire other staff before you've even taught your first student. I think that's a major problem for some teachers that are like, I don't want to teach, I just want to manage the teachers. And I think it's very difficult to do that without having done it yourself. And I don't think other teachers like that. They kind of want to know that you've got some kind of knowledge about how to do it. Otherwise, who are they going to look to for leadership?
I'll give another story to back up exactly what you're saying. This is not from Live Language, from our previous business when we owned brick and mortar language schools. My wife and I owned brick and mortar language schools. So as we were growing, we knew nothing about hiring. So we figured, I'm like, who are we going to hire to manage the teachers? Well, obviously our best teachers, right? Yeah, that bombed miserably. We found out, and because we did this, and I'm a very slow learner, so it took me 2 or 3 times of us doing this, where we just like, okay, the first best teacher didn't work, let's go for the second best teacher. And we had to fire now the first best teacher, so we lost our best teachers. We found out that best teachers do not necessarily make the best managers or the best team leads or whatever position you want to get them in, right? It's a totally different skill set. Now, you might get lucky. You might have a good teacher who also has that good manager skill set. But it's not as easy as people think. So even if you're going into online tutoring and you're a teacher and you want to grow your own tutoring business, learn another skill set. Just because you're a teacher does not necessarily mean you might know how to manage kids at a school, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to manage other adults at least 100% of the time. Some of you will be able to. So definitely agree with Alex on that one. We learned that the hard way. Hopefully some people here, thanks to your advice, can learn it the more easy way instead of making all the mistakes that we made while they were doing all of that. Another question that, is talking about managing staff now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a virtual company as well, right? You don't have a big fancy office somewhere, with 20 stories and thousands of employees, for example, right? It's more of a virtual company like Live Lingua. What are the benefits and disadvantages you see? Because that's, I think, where a lot of the industry is moving. It's kind of more to this virtual thing. So what are the benefits and disadvantages of running a virtual company that you've run across?
In our case, it's worked really, really well for us. We are a remote team, which means we do have team members across the world. What's worked really well for us is it means that people are happy wherever they may decide to be happy. In this case, I'm living in London, but we've got another team member that's in Spain. And that means that he's super stoked with where he's living. He does great work. But when we're hiring people, it's completely on trust. Like, we know that we can trust him 100%. We know that he's working more than he says he is. But because he's super engaged with what we're trying to do in terms of how, our mission for, impacting education, the quality of education across the globe. I think once you've got people that feel trusted, I think they really live up to those expectations. If you've hired right, of course.
Of course. And, hiring right 100% of the time is easy, right? I mean, there's no challenge whatsoever in doing that.
But I think also when you're small, actually, first of all, it's really important that you hire really right, because you don't have the ability to dilute bad actors. So it is really important that you hire really well. But I think, again, going back to, if you're looking for people to help you remotely, they need to be the kinds of people that would flourish in that kind of environment. In our case, we're hiring exactly those kinds of people that are 100% trustworthy, that actually enjoy having their own space to be able to work. They're not kind of needing lots of social interaction, which some people do. And so to be really aware that different personalities flourish in different environments. But that's kind of one thing. I think also a level of maturity. Some young people are very mature, but there's also some people that feel like they need to be constantly kind of, in contact with you. And that could be okay in some circumstances. But again, if you're a small business, you need a really high level of trust to be able to get enough stuff done. So there might be some ideas in there.
So what tips could you give people on how to find people like that, especially since it's virtual and you can literally hire from all over the world? What are some of the first steps that people can do when they start looking? Where have you guys looked? Where have you guys had success in finding staff like that?
So the first thing is, if you're hiring remote staff, then you're also competing with all the other companies that are wanting to hire staff. So in our case, we want people that really connect with our mission and really kind of engage with our, what we're trying to do with the quality of language teaching across the world. And so I think finding people that kind of will connect with your mission and your purpose is super important. But secondly, what you can do is think about where the big companies may not be looking as well, right? So if you're willing to help somebody, maybe work from their rural village in Scotland, then maybe the Silicon Valley companies or even just normal companies might not be looking there. So you can find those kind of unusual ways of finding people. And I think the third thing would be making sure that people start by doing rather than just relying on an interview. Like, I don't think people do their best work when they're in an interview process, and it doesn't really tell you a lot about what they're like as an actual, in the organization. So giving people the ability to test you out and for you to test them out is, I think, essential to having a really happy team, particularly if it's remote.
Nice. So the last question for this part of the interview that I usually ask is, what's in the future of LearnCube? Like, where are you guys headed? Is there anything exciting coming up on the horizon that you want to share?
Absolutely. So we have, we're working on how do we really take live language learning to the next level. Again, talking about niches, this is our niche, which is being the number one virtual classroom in language teaching. So first things, even in the short-term horizon, is how do we help people with homework? Auto-generating homework is like something that we feel that we can solve in the shorter term. We are looking at also how do we provide real AI teacher assistance to teachers within the class. Looking at how do we provide better feedback, both in real time to the teacher, but also eventually there's also got to be some ways for larger organizations, if they're managing hundreds of tutors, there's also got to be a way for them to have some visibility on what does quality teaching look like, and so they can share those best practices, the best content, and the best ideas amongst their staff. So I think empowering both teachers and schools through really smart technology.
That sounds really cool. I look forward to kind of seeing it when it's out there and following you guys, because we're both in the same industry, so we have a lot of crossover there. Without being competitors, for those who are listening to the podcast, that's why we're on here together. So, Alex, thanks for all this information. We're going to be right back after the final break, which we're going to have my favorite part, the pop quiz, so people get to learn a little bit more about you, and then we'll get all the important information on where people can get in touch with you. So we will be right back. Hey there, Anomalies. Ray here. I hope you're enjoying this interview. This is just a short reminder that if you like what you're hearing on the Anomalous Educator, you should subscribe to the show on wherever you get your podcasts. That way you won't miss any of our weekly episodes. If you have time to take that extra step, you can leave a review for me as well. If you prefer to tell me directly what you think of the show, just go to the website anomalouseducator.com. That's ANOMALOUSEDUCATOR.com. Yeah, it's a mouthful. And you can email me directly through our Contact Us page. Thanks in advance. Now, back to the show. And for my favorite part of the interview, the pop quiz. This is the part where I make the guests sweat a little bit with questions that are totally ridiculous and probably have nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but it's a lot of fun, at least for me. Hopefully, at least for some of the guests, it's kind of fun as well. So, Alex, you ready? You want to get stretched out? We don't want you to get injured, like you have on your previous physical activities, right?
No, I feel like I'm stretched. I'm ready to go. Let's do it. Right?
Let's do this. Okay. Would you rather eat a bowl full of crickets or a bowl full of worms?
Crickets. I actually ate them for my run.
Wow.
No shit. No, sorry, I don't know if I can say that, but actually, I had like.
Yeah, you're more polite than some of the guests I've had on there, so don't worry about it.
No, actually, I had cricket powder. Like basically, it was cricket powder that I was using for my protein bars. You wouldn't believe it.
Nice.
Here we are.
So you already eat bowls of cricket.
Already done it.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice. If you had to build a house out of food, which food would it be?
Oh, first thing that comes to mind was just spaghetti. It just seems like it would hold strong.
I'm assuming you mean uncooked spaghetti, not cooked
uncooked spaghetti.
Yeah, cooked spaghetti,
raw
not so
spaghetti.
much.
It feels like a good building material.
What was your dream job as a kid?
Do you know what? I'm really loving it, mate. Entrepreneurship, being an entrepreneur.
You've known since you were a little kid that you wanted to be
Since I was 16. I think it beats my mother's attempts at trying to make me become, was it a forensic scientist? Somebody that looks at crime. Anyway, dead people.
That was before CSI and all the popular
That was
TV.
before I learned what science was. It's like, no, give me some languages and some business. I'll be happy.
Okay, next one. If you were made the CEO of Starbucks, what would be your first executive order?
Oh, do you know what? I'm such a massive fan of New Zealand brewed coffee. So I would just get rid of the whole Starbucks thing and just introduce New Zealand coffee, beautiful New Zealand coffee. And I would just.
I don't know if New Zealand can produce enough coffee to supply all of Starbucks around the world. You'd have to replace all the sheep, I believe.
We definitely don't produce it, but we make a good brew.
Nice.
We make a great brew.
Well, I'll have to do that next time I visit. Okay, this one. What's the most embarrassing thing that's ever happened to you on a date?
On a date? You're going to get me stumbling, mate. I'm just trying to think back.
Is it just because there's so many to choose from, or just you've never had an embarrassing?
I would like to say that. I'm married for the last couple of years, so I'm trying to think back to my dating years. All right. Most embarrassing thing on a date would be, I don't know if it was embarrassing for me or for her.
It doesn't matter.
Literally on the first date, she was like talking about her kids, and I just, it was immediately like, why are we talking about our future children on our first date? I do not believe this is going to go much further.
And I'm assuming this is not the person you're married to right now.
No, this is not. This did not.
We will not name any names, so don't worry about it. And the final question: how can people get in touch with you and find out more?
Sure. Why don't you visit us on our website, www.LearnCube. That's the rectangle cube.com. My accent seems to always come through that people can't quite get that.
Oh, doesn't sound so bad. And how about you? Do you have a Twitter account that they can follow you on or anything?
I don't, but look, I'm actually really open to why don't you catch us on our email as well, support@learncube.com.
Perfect. Alex, thanks for coming on. It was a pleasure to have you on the Anomalous Educator podcast.
Likewise, Ray. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Alex. And that's it for our show. I hope you enjoyed the chat with the untirable Alex Asher. If you've decided to take the leap and teach online, you may also like our interview in episode 4 with Rachel Story, where we talk about different ways of getting students. If you enjoyed this episode of the Anomalous Educator podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. In our next episode, we'll be talking to Holly Jensen. You really don't want to miss this one. You know all those excuses you have about why you can't make that leap to teach online? This interview is going to show you that they're all just that, an excuse. Holly's story will inspire you to push past what you believe is your limitation and reach new heights. Talk to y'all next week.